Chapter 276. Fresh human flesh was always difficult to chew, especially for an old monk who had lost all his teeth. That was why he chewed very seriously, his skinny cheeks constantly trembling. Compassion and pity, as well as greed and bloodthirstiness, these two completely different emotions, were constantly changing in that pair of eyes that were still as calm as a spring lake. As the flesh that was chewed into a paste was swallowed into his stomach and absorbed, the old monk's sunken eyes gradually brightened. His skinny cheeks gradually filled up and his face that was as withered as a piece of wood gradually revealed a stronger liveliness. The girl's forearm was like a pure white lotus root that had been washed clean by the lake water. Accompanied by a terrifying ripping sound, a piece of flesh was bitten off while she was still alive. Blood flowed down from the wound. Her face was pale, but she pressed her lips together and refused to let out a cry of pain. The old monk stuck out his black tongue and licked the blood off the corner of his lips. He still maintained a compassionate expression on his face. However, the more it was so, the more chilling the contrast was. Ning Ke looked at the scene and felt a chill run down his spine. The development of the situation was too unexpected. Be it him or Yi Hongyu, they had never thought that Master Lotus, who was known for his noble character, would actually be such a terrifying devil. Most importantly, the aura that this old monk exuded was so pure and compassionate. Even if he had some doubts in his heart, he instinctively did not want to suspect this old monk. Master Lotus, who had already swallowed the mouthful of flesh and blood, seemed to have turned back into the highly respected and compassionate Vedanta of the Buddhism sect in an instant. He looked at Yi Hongyu who was under his palm. He saw the despair and hatred in the girl's eyes. He stretched out his finger and slowly slid it across her delicate face. He said pitifully, "You're so cute. How could I do this to you?" Yi Hongyu's sense of perception was controlled and she lost control of her body. However, her consciousness and senses were still sharp. She could clearly feel that she was becoming weaker and weaker. She also felt that the thin finger on her face was as cold and terrifying as a snake's tongue. Why did I do that? Why didn't I resist the temptation of flesh and blood? The old monk's eyes became a little hollow and a little confused. He murmured to himself and suddenly laughed at himself. He shook his head and sighed. At a glance, the two children in the see-through realm are still alive. After decades of condensing such a pitiful amount of psyche power, they have all been used up. Lotus, you are too weak now. His expression became calm again, and he gently explained to himself and the three young people in the room, I've been struggling on the edge of life and death for decades. As for his lifelong enemy, Koharan, he had left him endless humiliation and pain. And I have never met a truly selfless person in my life. I always thought that a bowl of fragrant fried egg noodles would not appear on the table out of nowhere. So the more pitiful and touching you were, the more uncomfortable I felt. Ning Ke continued, I am very curious about those stories that you told me earlier. Which of them is true? Or are they all ghost stories that you purposely told us to lower our guard? Those stories had the shadow of youngest uncle's shadow, so he was very concerned. However, the old monk sitting on the bone mountain and the young man sitting on the ground were clearly in a life and death situation. Yet, they had the leisure to gossip about such things. This scene was unavoidably a little strange. The old monk said with a pitiful expression, those stories that I told you earlier are all true, but there are some key points that I did not make clear. The massacre of the Lank Temple was planned by me. The beautiful dancer was eventually sucked dry by me. Her face was very pale after she died, so pale that it was almost transparent. But strangely, there was still a sweet smile on her pale face, as if she was asking me why I did it. He looked at Ning Ke and said calmly, at that time, I was very afraid of the smile on her face. I tried to wipe it off with my hands, but I could not. So in the end, I cut her into pieces and ate her. That was also the first time I ate a human. Ning Ke was silent for a long time. Suddenly, he asked, who was that dancer? The old monk smiled and said, she wanted to turn Kuharan into a madman. Naturally, it was his woman who died. Ning-Kei heard this answer and was silent for a long time. Then, he asked, was it to provoke a war between the academy and the divine hall? Or was it for some other reason? The old monk was silent for a moment. Then, he said expressionlessly, there was no other reason. It was just that Kuharan saw through it in the end. And Wei Guanming, that blockhead, somehow began to suspect my identity. I had no choice but to quietly leave the Peach Mountain and return to the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine. Then, these things happened. Listening to the gradually turbid aura, Ning-Kei was sure that this once peerless powerhouse was about to die after being imprisoned by youngest uncle for decades. If it was a head-on battle, he would not be a match for the three of them. However, this person had actually set up such a trap in such a short time. He was indeed a meticulous and terrifying person. However, thinking back to decades ago, this person had dominated the Buddhism, Taoism and the Devil's Doctrine. In the end, he had almost caused the whole world to fall into a bloody hell. For someone with such great ability to deal with the three of them was like a butcher knife to a chicken. It was natural that he could easily put them in such a desperate and dangerous situation. Ning-Kei looked at the old monk and asked his real question, regardless of Taoism, Devil's Doctrine or Buddhism, you are a respected bigwig. No matter which side you choose, or even if you don't choose, you can still become a legend in the history books. However, you chose the most bloody and boring path. Why? Why do you have to be the enemy of the world? These words sound familiar. The old monk looked at him and said slowly, many years ago, Wei Guanming often reflected on himself like this. He did not hesitate to be the enemy of the world because he believed that he was right. But I am different. The reason why I am the enemy of the world is very simple. It is because I know that the world is wrong. A friendly recommendation for a new book, Rootless Tao, book number 223-7246. The author is an old reader of The Spy. To be honest, I really do not have the time to read this book. If you are interested, please give it a try. Perhaps you will like it. The book already has nearly 500,000 words. According to the author, there are still 100,000 manuscripts left. The future is promising. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 277. Many readers probably didn't see the author's announcement. It was written in the author's information at the beginning of the book. I was afraid that you didn't see it, so I wanted to remind you that I have moved to the introduction. For thousands of years, having the freedom to eat meat and the ability to eat meat is the goal that we, the spirits of all living things, strive for. All of a sudden, the old monk's extremely long white eyebrows fluttered without any wind. He was not floating like an immortal, but inexplicably irritable. His eyes widened and his skinny hand rubbed the girl's hair hard. He shouted, how can there be any reason in this world? I am the great divine priest of judgment and once sat on the seat of heavenly black jade. I am the high priest of the Devil's Doctrine and can choose a suzerain. I am the protector of the front gate of the Buddhism sect and can serve tens of thousands of monks. How glorious and proud have I been in my life? How can there be any reason in this world? Look at this dirty world. Who knows how many mediocre idiots are living in it? Don't you feel that the air you breathe is so dirty and stinky? Don't you feel that breathing is extremely uncomfortable when you have a thief who has been silent for so many years? It is natural for people to eat meat in this world. Eating pigs, dogs, chickens, and heaven and earth. How can there be any reason? Ning-Kei suddenly said, but this does not include eating people. The old monk fell silent again. After some time, the merciful aura returned to him. He said thoughtfully and slowly, yes, there is always some reason in this world. It is just that the level of reason is different. In my opinion, the way you and I exist in this world is the combination of our own ways of understanding the world. After that night of bitter rain in the tomb, I have been trying hard to understand the true origin of the world. In the end, I changed the way I exist in this world. Finally, I want to change this world and find the world that I can no longer return to. When I was enlightened and debated in the Lank Temple, the hierarch of the West Hill Divine Palace praised my eloquence and invited me to enter the Devil's Doctrine on behalf of the Central Plains Orthodox sects. However, he did not know that I was actually a member of the Devil's Doctrine from the day I was born. A childlike smile appeared on the old monk's skinny face. There were no teeth in his parted lips, so he looked more like a baby that had just been born. He gave off a feeling of innate purity, and even his mockery was so naive. I only pursue power and find a way to change the world. I don't care about the difference between Taoism and demonic Tao, nor do I care about who wins or loses. The reason why I'm willing to come to the Devil's sect is because I want to see the lost heavenly book. However, the Ming hand scroll was not in the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine. The people of the Devil's Doctrine hiding in the mountains, hiding in the countries of the Central Plains like rats, and fanning the flames like women, disgusted me, so I left again. The old monk's face showed a strong look of mockery and disgust. He was like a woman in the marketplace who looked at other people selling vinegar with 2 bowls of water, full of pride and disdain. I went to the great river of the South Jin Kingdom, to the Yueluan Kingdom, and finally to the west, to the faraway unknown place. In the Xiankong Temple, I finally heard the preaching of the chief monk, saw the clear Buddha light, and heard the deafening words of Buddha. However, after a few years, I finally realized that the monks in the Xiankong Temple were just some filthy things. The so-called words of Buddha were deliberately mystifying, and they were no different from the fortune-tellers on the streets of the Kingdom of Song. What was even more disgusting was that the Buddhism sect cultivated themselves so that they could only wait humbly in the face of the transfer of fate. How could they reach the other side like this? The old monk's white eyebrows floated up and then fell back down. His eyes were full of dissatisfaction, like a young scholar who stopped the Prime Minister's sedan chair on the road and asked how to pull himself together if the country was not at peace. Obviously, his impression of the unknown place of the Buddhism sect was much better than his impression of the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine. However, he was still angry at the other party's lack of ambition. Finally, I returned from the wilderness and officially accepted the invitation of the hierarch to secretly join the West Hill Divine Palace. With the help of my trusted followers in the Devil's Doctrine, I killed 2 extremely stupid elders. Only then did I reveal my identity and sit on the black jade throne of judgment. Ning Ke and Mo Shanshan had been listening in silence. Finally, they could not help but ask, since you are a member of the Devil's Doctrine, why did you help the West Hill Divine Palace to kill your own elders? If I didn't do that, how could I win the trust of Haotian Taoism? If I didn't do that, how could that shabby temple let me, a successor of the Xiankong Temple, read their treasured books? However, that shabby temple was extremely stingy. Even though I did so many things for Haotian Taoism, they only let me read the Ri hand scroll and the Sha hand scroll. The old monk said coldly, even though I only read 2 volumes of the tomes of arcane, they are indeed extraordinary. I thought I had finally found the right place and had the opportunity to understand the real world. However, after staying on Peach Mountain for a few days, I found that the West Hill Divine Palace is a group of cowardly idiots. He suddenly looked down and saw that Yi Hongyu's eyes were already filled with anger. He knew that his mockery of the West Hill Divine Palace had angered the girl. He could not help but laugh and said, "Poor child, am I wrong to say that? Hundreds of millions of Haotian disciples in the world only know about the Divine Hall but not the Jisho Abbey. Those sitting in the white temples on Peach Mountain should know what they should do if they had the courage and backbone. But how did they do it? They look high and mighty, but in the end, they are being ordered around by a shabby Taoist temple." Thinking of the cyan robe in that shabby Taoist temple, the old monk's expression slightly froze. Then he said mockingly, "They are all a group of dogs. So what if it is that shabby Taoist temple? After all, they are still dogs raised by Haotian. Haha, they are all dogs. Arrogant laughter burst out from his dried lips that were stained with blood. The old monk's white eyebrows flew up as if they were dancing. He was full of heroic spirit and looked like a young swordsman who was walking in the countryside with a sword in hand, looking for injustice. The slightly hoarse but full of heroic laughter echoed in the quiet and dim room. Ning Kei stared blankly at the old monk who was leaning forward and backward on the white bones mountain as if he would fall at any time. He could clearly feel the wild meaning in the laughter. He could not help but think that this person was indeed qualified to call youngest uncle a friend back then. It was indeed somewhat reasonable. After walking in the world for so many years and searching for so many years, there are still dogs everywhere. After thinking about it, I still think that the great divine priest of light who founded the devil's doctrine was interesting, so I returned to the devil's doctrine. The old monk said indifferently, however, I did not expect that after so many years, the devil's doctrine is still as dirty as it was back then. The good-for-nothing who occupied the position of suzerain became more and more senile and muddle-headed. He even wanted to abolish the inheritance of the saintess of the devil's doctrine because he could not bear to part with his own daughter. The rest of the people were even more immersed in the boring pleasure of killing. They were as boring as beasts. At this time, I finally found a glimmer of hope in the front gate. It was a little boy. I saw in him the possibility of reviving the devil's doctrine and changing the whole world. However, it was a pity that I killed his father in order to establish my authority after returning to the front gate. Therefore, he did not believe anything I said at all. I brought back so many wonderful skills from the holy land of Buddhism and Taoism, but he refused to learn them. Instead, he insisted on learning the 23-year cicada cultivation that had no hope of success. The old monk recalled the past and shouted angrily, my only hope was shattered again. What should I do? Finally, I thought of a way. Chapter 279. Ning Kei knew why the old monk suddenly praised the academy. It was because the academy dared to accept someone like him, which required an unimaginable breadth of mind and an attitude of tolerance. Such an academy deserved everyone's admiration. He said proudly, the academy wins in this world. The old monk said mockingly, but the academy will eventually become a ruin. Ning Kei said, everything in the world is like that, but at least the academy will not become a ruin because of your curse. The old monk looked at this young man who was seriously injured but still proud and confident, as if he was looking at his friend from many years ago. After a moment of silence, he suddenly asked, how many years has it been since Kuharan died? Ning Kei was startled and shook his head. I don't know. I told him that Haran's sword had entered the devil's way, but he did not care. I warned him that if he continued to be so proud, he would be punished by Haotian one day, but he still did not care. Now he must have turned into ashes and scattered across every stream and every mountain in the world. I wonder if he is still so proud now, ha 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 ha. The old monk lowered his head and laughed like a madman. A turbid old tear squeezed out from the corner of his eye. Ning Kei said, youngest uncle should be proud even if he died. The old monk raised his head, looked at him, and said coldly, but he died in front of me, so I won. Ning Kei said mockingly, some people die, but he is still alive. Some people live, but he is already dead. The old monk sighed and said, what a sharp-tongued young man. Will I succeed next time? Ning Kei suddenly asked sincerely. His body was still trembling slightly under the cotton clothes. Although this method was very exhausting, it was the only way to maintain mobility under the terrifying mental control of the other party. The old monk looked at him and said sincerely, there will not be a next time. Ning Kei said, you are indeed the most powerful existence I can imagine. But you, who have been imprisoned for decades, are just a king who has been reduced to dust. I, who am young and strong, am a fierce tiger who has just come down from the mountain. The confinement's isolation of the chi of heaven and earth does not affect me. I am used to doing things with my strength. There is no reason for you to recover faster than me. The old monk smiled and said, "You are indeed sharp-tongued. Unfortunately, I am so old that I have no teeth." With that, he lowered his head and bit down hard on Yi Hongyu's bare shoulder. Yi Hongyu raised her eyebrows but refused to lower her head. She stubbornly watched as the old monk chewed on her flesh. It was as if she wanted to engrave this scene in her mind and never forget it even in the underworld. The old monk did not have any teeth, so he used his gums to chew. It was extremely difficult, like an old toothless lion trying to tear apart a doe with tough skin and flesh. Blood kept dripping from the corner of his old lips. After a while, the old monk looked up at Ning Kei and said with a smile, "You want to waste time, so do I. After digesting the first bite, the second bite will be absorbed faster. You don't have to struggle anymore. You can calmly welcome death. That will be more joyful. After I reincarnate the three of you into my stomach and recover my power, I will destroy this confinement and leave the mountain. This world will be mine, and it will also be yours." Because of the flesh and blood in his mouth, the old monk's voice was a little muffled. But it was still as warm as spring water. His wrinkled lips and chin were dripping with blood, but his smile seemed to be plated with a layer of Buddha's light. The mountain of bones and the sea of corpses on his body were like a holy lotus seat, overflowing with clear light. Such an image of the Buddha and the devil was extremely terrifying. Ning Kei knew what he said was true. He thought about all the ways to save his life, but could not find a way to break out of the current crisis. Whether it was the bag that Master Yen Sei left for him, the primordial 13 arrows or the talisman on the padao, they all needed to be connected with nature to exert their true power. He could not help but think of death in silence. He stared at the old monk and said firmly, "Even if you can get out, this world will not be yours." The old monk recalled the green robe and said with a smile, "I have already connected with Tao and the devil. Why should I be afraid of the laws of the world?" Ning Kei shook his head and said, "There is still the headmaster of the academy." The old monk was silent for a moment and said, "The headmaster of the academy will die eventually. People in the academy are too proud, and the more proud they are, the more likely they will die. This is the fate of the headmaster of the academy and the fate of the academy. It cannot be changed." Ning Kei frowned slightly and said, "Crazy words." The old monk suddenly asked, "Who is the empress of the Tang Empire in Chang'an? How many generals in the peak state of martial arts have appeared in recent years? Has the devil dance appeared again? Koharan was punished by heaven. Did the headmaster of the Peach Mountain? Something is not right. This little girl said that she is the Grand Master of the Judicial Department. Has the Divine Hall not been destroyed? When Koharan was punished by heaven and the headmaster of the academy went to the Peach Mountain, he thought that the Divine Hall on the Peach Mountain would naturally be destroyed. Now that he was sure that the West Hill Divine Palace still existed, he could not help but feel confused. He believed that his plan would not have any loopholes. Ning Kei did not know how to answer these questions. It seemed like a crazy question, but there seemed to be a lot of history hidden in it. There were many secrets hidden in the dust. This old monk was sometimes as innocent and pure as a newborn baby, sometimes as mean and hot-tempered as a shrewish woman in the market, sometimes as hot-blooded as a young scholar in the capital, sometimes as heroic as a young swordsman holding a sword to fight against injustice, sometimes as compassionate as a Vedanta of Buddhism, and sometimes as cruel and indifferent as a demon. No matter which image it was incomparably real and there was not a single trace of falsehood. His various appearances were different, but they all came from his heart. It was so pure that it made one's heart palpitate. It was just like the saying, if you want to become a Buddha, then become a Buddha. If you want to become a demon, then become a demon. They were all true Buddhas and true demons looking at the world with pity or indifference. He was simple but fickle, lonely and weak, complicated and annoying, sometimes jealous and sometimes sinister, fond of competing and occasionally complaining, selfish and boring but perverted and adventurous, fond of sophistry and fantasy, kind and loving but vengeful and tyrannical. He was proud when he was glorious, sad when he was dull, contradictory and hypocritical, joyful but painful, great but insignificant. Note, Lotus had 32 petals, each with different petals. It was hard to imagine that a person's personality and thoughts could be so complicated. Ning Ke thought coldly, could it be that this person actually had 32 personalities? After the old monk finished speaking, he calmly closed his eyes and began to use the secret method of the devil's doctrine, Tao Tai, to digest and absorb the Tao addict's flesh and blood into his primordial qi. Ning Ke's voice echoed in the quiet room, but no one answered him now. These voices seemed monotonous and uneasy, even faintly revealing a sense of despair. There is no devil in the world, but when there are more people like you, there will be a devil. No matter what role you play, you will be a devil. Lotus has 32 petals, each of which is dirty. When Taoism and devil are connected, they will become gods, but they can also become crazy. No matter what Ning Ke said, the old monk in the White Bone Mountain did not respond. He had spent so much effort to come up with these seemingly philosophical words, but they were all wasted in the dry air. He could not anger the other party, and it was even more impossible for the other party to have some loopholes in his mind because of these words. Ning Ke weakly rested his head on Mo Shanshan's shoulder and looked at the bluestones on the roof. He knew that after the old monk had completely digested and absorbed the second mouthful of flesh and blood that was filled with the aura of Hautian Taoism, his state would recover to a level that he could not reach. At that time, there would be no way to change the fate of death. His gaze became a little dim. The light in the room of the Devil's Hall was getting dimmer and dimmer. It was probably night time in the world outside the mountain, and the temperature was getting lower. He looked up at the mottled sword marks on the roof and the stone walls. Those were the sword marks left by youngest uncle, the sword marks that formed a confinement that had trapped Lotus 32 for decades. He sighed softly in his heart. It was just a casual glance. He did not deliberately control his state of mind. It was probably because he had become used to using the 8 strokes calligraphy of Yong in the old library. The dense sword marks naturally separated in his vision and gradually became clear. Ning Ke's gaze stayed on those sword marks for a long time. His state of mind followed the marks and gradually developed a certain feeling. This feeling was very obscure, difficult to grasp, and difficult to distinguish, but his body warmed up because of it. Note, the 32 words of Lotus 32 are all from the lyrics of a song, Do Wei's Advanced Animal. Also, I would like to clarify that the main problem with the slow development of the plot is the slow updating. I have been writing seriously and attentively, sleeping in the afternoon and thinking about the manuscript. But the updating is indeed a problem, and I am thinking about how to solve it. Maybe it will explode, or maybe I will not use this name for the time being. Although it is indeed entering the devil, please look forward to it. Also, little Junjun of the high-rise building has started a new book. The book number is 230-8671. The disgusting advertisement is below, please go and ravage him. Welcome, to the country of dragons. Welcome, to the world of dragon skills. Come on. Here is the most exciting, most passionate, most hot-blooded gorgeous chapter. Come on. Let us enter the world of dragon soul of heaven and earth together and create a dragon era that belongs to us. To be continued, high-rise building strongest work of the year. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for it. Your support is my greatest motivation. He was silent for a long time, thinking about how to answer. This was the first time in his 2 lifetimes that he had been confessed to by a man of the opposite sex. This was one of the most touching words he had heard in both lifetimes. Although it was a pity that it happened in the dark front gate of the Devil's Doctrine and at the moment of death, it was still as pleasant as the sound of willow branches rubbing against each other by the lake. Was that the Ink Lake at the foot of Mogan Mountain? The girl on his shoulder was the best in the world in terms of temperament, appearance, and state of cultivation. Many young men secretly admired her but did not dare to say anything. In Ning Kei's eyes, Mo Shanshan could not find any fault with her, except that she was easily misunderstood as aloof and cold because of her poor eyesight. In terms of sect, family, or political background, the Tang Empire and the Great River Kingdom had been on good terms for generations. The headmaster of the academy and His Majesty would definitely be happy to see this. They were a good match. In terms of hobbies, the two could be said to be like-minded. If they were really together, they could spend a long night together splashing ink and appreciating each other's works. Wouldn't that be wonderful? The most important thing was, did he like her? Of course he liked her. A man's love was sometimes very complicated, but most of the time it was very simple. A girl like Mo Shanshan, who was worthy of being liked, should naturally be liked. So was Ning Quebec. It was just that he was about to die in the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine, and he still had the mood to think about so many things for so long. When he came to his senses, he could not help but laugh. He always felt that something was wrong. This feeling was very strange. Any background and worldly matters were not important before he died. Moreover, he asked himself if he really liked this girl who was as pure as ink. However, he became more and more vigilant about the strange feeling in his heart. It was as if he was about to take the crucial step before joining the devil. Behind the great beauty was a great fear. What was that fear? Ning Kei himself did not know. He looked at the girl on his shoulder and said helplessly, "Younger sister Shanshan, I like your temperament and appearance, including the way you do things. Logically speaking, at this time, I should not." Mo Shanshan's face did not have the usual shyness after a girl's confession. She only had a gentle and calm expression. She knew why Ning Kei was hesitating. She knew better than this guy himself why he was hesitating. She could not help but sigh softly in her heart. She gently leaned into his arms and murmured, "You are really muddle-headed in some aspects. I just don't want to die, and you don't know my feelings for you. I'm not in a hurry to hear any comfort from you. At this moment, anything you say doesn't count and isn't fair. I'm just telling you this." Ning Kei wanted to refute that he was muddle-headed. However, he thought that he was indeed muddle-headed at this time. Why couldn't he hold this girl in his arms according to his true feelings and tell her that he liked her too? Then he could make up for the regrets of his 2 lives before he died. What was he afraid of? However, he felt Mo Shanshan's feelings and was touched. He softly said, "Then I know." Mo Shanshan smiled contentedly. She slowly closed her eyes and leaned into his arms. She said, "Then this is enough." In the dark and silent room of the Devil's Palace, in the middle of the hill of bones and corpses, a ghost-like old monk gently pressed his palm on the head of a beautiful girl who was covered in blood. It was as cold as winter. However, in the other corner of the room, a young man and a young woman who were about to meet death were gently hugging each other and whispering like small animals. It was as warm as spring. This bloody and cruel but beautiful scene made people's hearts palpitate and move. Beautiful feelings could not make the world truly beautiful. It seemed warm like spring, but in fact, as the night shrouded the mountain outside the Devil's Doctrine, the light in the room became darker and the temperature dropped. The weak Mo Shanshan leaned into Ning Kei's arms and fainted. Ning Kei, who was severely injured, also felt that the heat in his body was gradually disappearing. He vaguely remembered the previous warmth. He instinctively raised his head and looked at the bluestones on the roof again. He suddenly found that the mottled sword marks on the stones did not disappear with the night, but began to emit a faint flame. Youngest uncle had killed the powerhouses of the Devil's Doctrine with his sword. His sword was stained with blood, and then he climbed up the stone wall and finally became the ghost fire today. But Ning Ke clearly remembered that ghost fire should be the remains of a rotten corpse, and it should not last for too long. He squinted at the increasingly clear sword marks on the roof and gradually became entranced. Once again, he habitually used the 8 strokes calligraphy of Yong to solve it, completely forgetting the injuries on his body and even forgetting to cough. The mottled sword marks with a faint flame began to decompose into dense light filaments, and then began to circulate in his field of vision. It was as if he was lying on the grassland and looking at the sky full of stars above his head, beautiful and peaceful. Suddenly, Ning Ke felt a trace of warmth in his body. This time, he did not let the feeling pass, nor did he pay too much attention to it. He just carefully experienced and enjoyed it. The sword marks on the roof flowed according to a certain pattern in his field of vision. The warmth seemed to correspond to it and began to circulate in his body, from his wrist to his neck. Wherever it passed, he felt warm and comfortable. Her hands, which were supporting herself on the broken bones, trembled slightly. Her cold eyes were filled with a sense of self-abandonment. There will be an important chapter later. Please read it and give your comments. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for it. Your support is my greatest motivation. Why did she return to the see-through state in such an obviously dangerous way? What did she want to do? Then, something incredible happened. Yi Hongyu raised her head and stared at Divine Lord Lotus. Her cold eyes were filled with determination and determination. The red dress on her body suddenly turned pale and her state dropped to the see-through state. A majestic and powerful aura surged from her body and broke through the mind control from the palm above her head. It charged towards the old monk's body. One state would never drop naturally. It was rare to hear of any cultivator who could drop their state by themselves. However, Master Lotus was well versed in Taoism and Devil's Law. He knew what Yi Hongyu was trying to do when the aura on her body changed. The West Hill Divine Palace had a powerful Taoist law. This Taoist law could allow cultivators to drop their state by themselves. Once this Taoist law was used, the aura that the cultivator had comprehended from the upper state would be released in an instant. The powerful psyche that had been accumulated through decades of hard work and meditation would form a terrifying impact once it was released. However, the price to pay for this Taoist law was too high. The state that the cultivator had gone through a lot of hardships to comprehend was even more important than their lives and families. Who would be willing to give it up and start from scratch? Furthermore, after using this Taoist law, it would be many times more difficult for a cultivator to re-enter the original state than when they first broke through the state. To the powerhouses of the Divine Hall who were qualified to come into contact with this Taoist law, no one would be willing to use this Taoist law on the long road of cultivation. This was more painful and sadder than asking them to die. The powerhouses of the Divine Hall who used this Taoist law would definitely fall into a situation that was more terrifying than death. It required great courage and determination. Note, Yi Hongyu, the Tao addict, was already a grand cultivator in the knowing destiny state. She was undoubtedly the most powerful person in the younger generation in the world. However, at this moment, she did not hesitate to force her state to drop from the knowing destiny state to the see-through state. She did not care about the price and reputation she had to pay. Because she was in a situation that was more terrifying than death and colder than the underworld. She saw a glimmer of hope, so she did not hesitate to use death to fight for this chance. In this cold room without a trace of chi of heaven and earth, what else could she do other than burning her own state? The gap between the knowing destiny state and the see-through state was the storm-like aura that surged from her body. It was the distance of half a foot between the old monk's palm and her head. The storm-like aura suddenly approached him. At this moment, the dozens of white bones that were lying between the old monk and Ning Ke were what Mo Shanshan had comprehended when she was outside the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine. Although it could not be compared to the real stone array tactics, it was powerful enough. Master Lotus's expression became more and more solemn. He felt a strong sense of uneasiness and the shadow hidden in the rotation of fate. That young man had comprehended the Haoran sword style that was left behind by Ku Haoran. That young girl from the Taoism sect could actually perform such a powerful and fierce Taoist art of lowering one's state. And this girl who looked weak and harmless could actually comprehend the stone array tactics. The old monk's skinny palm was like a lotus flower. The jade petals bloomed, and every petal was an extremely powerful psyche power attack. The girl picked up the white bone pieces and the stones that fell from the wall, and continuously repaired the array that she had just comprehended. Ning Ke was in the simple array that was formed by the white bones and stones. He held his knife and meditated. In the serene hall, the sound of something breaking through the air could be heard. The old monk was expressionless, and his eyes were as deep as the netherworld. Fresh blood flowed down from Mo Shanshan's thin lips like a stream, soaking the thick white cotton jacket on her body. Her long and sparse eyelashes trembled slightly on her pale face, as if she could close her eyes at any time. In the pool of blood and scattered bones, Yi Hongyu stared at the old monk's old face. Her eyes were burning with excitement, and her seductive face that was dripping with blood looked weak and crazy. She laughed weirdly and said, "Old monster, continue sucking. Before my blood is sucked dry by you, I want to see who is faster, you or him. I want to see who will survive." Note, about lowering one's state, it can be roughly understood using electronic transition. This is today's first chapter. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 282. Master Lotus looked at her indifferently and suddenly smiled. He lowered his head gently and sucked the blood off her delicate cheeks as if he was sucking the dew off a lotus. Then, he bit off another piece of her flesh. Yi Hongyu's eyes were filled with pain, but she laughed crazily. "You are afraid." Master Lotus ignored her and chewed the third mouthful of blood calmly. He tried to recover his spirit and vitality in the shortest time possible, at least before Ning Ke woke up. In the world decades ago, he was the most terrifying and powerful figure. Today, facing him, three of the most outstanding people of the younger generation in the world had exploded at the same time. They had finally found a glimmer of hope in the midst of despair. They had fought for a chance of survival in the face of death. The strong confidence and perseverance contained in this dangerous process made even Master Lotus, who had seen countless earth-shattering events in his life, palpitate. He had to show his respect by being serious. The key point of the current situation was that when the calligraphy addict risked the collapse of her sense of perception to forcefully build the stone array formation to block Master Lotus's psyche power attack, would Master Lotus use the practice of Tao Tai to recover his strength first, or would Ning Ke first comprehend the Haoran sword style and wake up from the muddled state? Ning Ke did not know that the situation was so dangerous. He did not know what kind of sacrifice and effort the calligraphy addict and Tao addict had made in order to prevent Lotus from interrupting his inexplicable state of cultivation. He did not know what he was doing. He did not know why he felt close to the sword marks and flames. His body and even the aura in his body subconsciously followed the direction of the sword marks. He even forgot everything that had happened previously and the world outside of himself. This state was very dangerous. It was like a naked baby walking in the dangerous wilderness without any weapons, and could be injured and eaten by wild beasts at any time. But it was also because this state was full of innocence, clean and transparent, without a speck of dust, that it could sincerely accept the projection of the outside world on its mind. This state was called emptiness. Ning Ke felt very good and powerful in the emptiness state. In front of him was only the stone wall, the roof, and the four walls of the green stone wall. The mottled sword marks on the stone wall seemed to have come to life, entering his soul through his eyes and evolving into countless things. Like the stars moving in the night sky, like the stream jumping in the valley, like the clouds floating in the blue sky, like the mountain standing proudly in the world, like a traveler walking happily on the road. Those sword marks started to flow, forming traces, like a book gradually turning its pages. On each page, there were clear diagrams. Those diagrams seemed to be some kind of magical footwork, some kind of powerful sword technique, and some kind of magical cultivation technique. But at the same time, they were nothing, just some kind of meaning, some kind of attitude. He followed the sword mark in his eyes and began to imitate walking. He began to wield the knife like a sword, began to think silently, and began to savor it with a smile. His steps became smoother and smoother, and the pedal he held became more and more fluid. Vaguely, he comprehended something on a deeper level. The sword marks that youngest martial uncle left on the blue stone wall were actually just to express some kind of emotion. His steps became smoother and smoother, and his saber swings became smoother and smoother. In the end, he felt carefree. If a traveler wanted to see more of the world and forget the fatigue and pain of the journey, he should dance and sing as he walked. The mountains stood alone in the world, and had to ignore the worship of the common people to be free, so they should be proud and awe-inspiring. The clouds stopped or floated in the blue sky because they were following the direction of the wind. The stream flowed down the valley, and had to treat every collision with the stone as a game. It rushed down briskly with the attraction of the earth, creating countless beautiful splashes. This was called jumping. The stars in the night sky were either still or moving, and just smiled at the world according to their own thoughts. Everything was as it should be. This was a carefree feeling that was called as it should be. Because it should be, even if thousands of people were in front of me, I would go when I wanted to. I had a great spirit, so I should be free to go. This was the truth between the heaven and the earth. In his badly damaged sense of perception, the psyche power that he had obtained from meditation for more than 10 years began to flow slowly like the clouds, the stars, and the stream. It began to be as still as a mountain, and began to be as cheerful as a traveler. The sword style contained in the mottled sword marks on the stone wall floated along with the faint phosphorescence and gradually penetrated into his body. As his mind was enlightened, the sword style sped up and then began to flow with the psyche power, stopping and jumping. He did not know what kind of existence these sword styles were. After entering his body, they turned into a warm flow and repaired his sense of perception in a very short time. Then they continued to pierce his snow mountain and ocean of chi from between his eyebrows. The feeling of his sense of perception being repaired and moisturized was very good. Ning Ke stood in front of the stone wall with the knife in his hand, unaware of everything outside. But his eyebrows unconsciously stretched, and then suddenly tightened, feeling a very strong pain in his chest and abdomen. The snow-capped peak reflected the starlight under the night sky. As the chi of heaven and earth rapidly poured into the front gate, it drove the stagnant aura between the stones and even caused the starlight to flow. The fresh aura of heaven and earth that was full of vitality finally passed through the broken confinement and came to the hall that had not been here for decades. Then, it poured into the old monk's skinny body like a flood. The old monk's sunken eyes suddenly shone brightly and turned into a crystal. His skinny cheeks magically became plump at a speed visible to the naked eye. His two arms that were stretched out in the wind became smooth and firm. Just like what he said before, his time was up. So was Ning Ke's time. He had completely understood the Haran sword chi that youngest uncle had passed to him. He could already control his transformed body and began to greedily and forcefully absorb the aura of heaven and earth that rushed into the room. Then, he turned it into his own power, absorbing the chi of heaven and earth into his body. This was the most obvious and most unacceptable feature of the devil's doctrine. After the fresh and inexhaustible aura of heaven and earth entered his body, it was branded by psyche power. Then, it passed through the passage between the snow mountain and the ocean of chi and turned into a majestic power. It passed through the meridians to every part of his body. His arms, muscles, bones, fingertips, and even his hair began to tremble at a high frequency, as if they were jumping for joy because they were powerful. The sole of his foot landed. With a crisp sound, he crushed a white bone in front of him. The second time he landed, his foot had crushed a large pile of white bones. Ning Kai skimmed to the mountain of bones and came to the front of the old monk. He held the knife with both hands and stabbed it into the old monk's chest. The blade of the knife vibrated at a high speed due to the strong power coming from the hilt. It cut and shook the surrounding air, causing wisps of white turbulence. The cold talisman on the surface of the knife was activated, but it was even more terrifying than the speed of the knife itself. This was the fastest attack he had ever made in his life. It was as fast as lightning. This was the strongest attack he had ever made in his life. It was as fast as thunder. The electric knife that carried the Great Spirit did not allow for the blink of an eye or even the time to think before it violently reached the old monk's chest. The sharp tip of the knife pierced into the old monk's chest before he could react. At this moment, Master Lotus was absorbing the chi of heaven and earth non-stop. His cheeks were plump and his arms had recovered. His body was full of vitality like a newly bloomed lotus. However, he did not expect Ning Kai's first strike to be so overwhelming and unstoppable. At this moment, he had recovered about 10% of his state power from his peak. He knew that his sense of perception had finally been invaded by the old monk's terrifying spiritual power once again. He also finally understood that the space 1 foot in front of a truly powerful cultivator was definitely their world. Be it their power or consciousness, everything would be under their control. The night sky suddenly shook. It did not crack, but the billions of stars embedded in it fell. Those stars cut through the sky and smashed into the wilderness in front of him with long tails. The earth groaned and trembled painfully. The winter trees and frost grass were covered by the splashed mud or burned to ashes by the high temperature. He knew what this scene represented. The billions of stars that fell from the night sky were Master Lotus's spiritual power. The moaning and groaning wasteland, grass, and trees were his sea of consciousness. When the wilderness and the grass and trees were turned into a purgatory by the falling stars and turned into scorched earth, his sea of consciousness would be broken and he would either die or become an ignorant cripple. Ning Kai stood in the wilderness and looked at the wildfire caused by the falling stars. He looked at the horrifying crater in the wilderness nearby. He did not brush off the black mud on his body, nor did he hide, because he did not know how to avoid it. He had just inherited youngest uncle's legacy and risked being punished by heaven. He saw that he could survive in the midst of death, but he ended up in such a hopeless situation and was about to die. Was this really fate? Was it really Haotian's curse? His heart was cold and he even felt true despair. However, in the depths of his despair, there was still a strong unwillingness and a strong desire to shatter all these stars. It was as if an existence in the unseen world had sensed his strong unwillingness and desire. An extremely faint shadow slowly spread over his head and covered his entire body. He looked at the shadow in front of him and his own shadow that was even deeper in the shadow. He suddenly turned around. There was nothing in the wilderness behind him. There was only a statue. A black statue. The statue seemed to be a human, but also seemed to be a deity. As its back was facing the light, its face and body were immersed in the deep shadow and could not be seen clearly. The stars in the night sky were still falling. Hundreds of millions of stars kept hitting the wilderness and became denser and denser, gradually annihilating Ning Kai's body. After the appearance of this black statue, the falling stars were like moths that had seen a flame and were strongly attracted by an invisible force. They all swept toward the black statue. The stars that had caused such a huge commotion earlier were as weak as fireflies when they collided with the huge black statue. Hundreds of millions of stars were a group of weak fireflies. They kept hitting each other and flashed a weak flame. The weak flame was also absorbed by the black statue. The black statue gradually heated up and then turned red, as if it was plated with a layer of blood. It should be very hot, right? Ning Ke looked at the huge statue in confusion and thought so. Suddenly, he felt a sharp pain in his waist. He looked down and saw that his belt was emitting wisps of green smoke, as if it was about to burn. He did not know what was inside, but it was extremely hot. Ning Ke returned to the real world. Only then did he realize that the old monk had pushed the blade out a few inches from his chest. The hard hilt was already at his waist, pressing against something in his belt. That thing was so hot that it seemed to be burning. It was maddening. Ning Ke stared at the old monk's warm but cold eyes. He held the hilt tightly and pushed it forward. Blood flowed from the corner of his mouth like a waterfall. He roared in pain, his feet digging deep into the limestone floor like nails. He leaned forward and used the hard object at his waist to hold the hilt of the saber. He put all his weight on it, and the edge of the saber went in another inch. The old monk looked at the blade that was slowly entering his chest and his eyes were filled with disbelief. His mental strength touched Ning Ke's body and disappeared instantly, like a clay ox entering the sea. The speed of the loss was shocking. In just a moment, his sense of perception was half empty. Using the devil's skill to absorb the chi of heaven and earth relied on pure psyche power to control it. At this time, the psyche power in his sense of perception was drying up. The chi of heaven and earth in the devil's hall did not enter his body but floated towards Ning Ke's body. The old monk could clearly feel that the power from the blade in his hands had suddenly increased. He glared at Ning Ke, and then looked down at his waist. There was an extremely soft sound of friction. It was like the gentle breeze from a lake brushing across the lotus leaves. The sharp blade cut off a few fingers and the broken fingers fell slowly. The pure white lotus petals fell off. Ning Ke let out a muffled groan. The pedao in his hand violently pierced forward, accompanied by an unstoppable Haran sword style. The bright blade pierced into the old monk's chest with a puff, directly piercing through his heart. Chapter 4, to be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 287. The old brush pen shop did not keep idlers, except for Ning Quebec Sang Sang took in the old man and even persuaded him to start cultivating the divine skill. She sincerely called him her teacher. But thinking of the old man's cowardly appearance before they met, she arranged a lot of housework for him, so that he would not become the kind of old man who carried a teapot and walked around in the street, basking in the sun and picking his teeth, pretending to be pitiful and scolding his daughter-in-law. The old man was not used to it at first. Since he left the small Taoist temple in the kingdom of Song decades ago, he had never done such chores as washing dishes and wiping tables. Whether he was sitting on the throne or being imprisoned in the secluded prison behind the Peach Mountain, there were countless people serving him. As the great god above the clouds, when had his hands ever been stained with water? But now he had to learn these things, because it was Sang Sang's request. He was Sang Sang's teacher, and he also thought that a successor should learn to respect his teacher. But he was very clear that if he did not listen to this little girl, he might no longer be her teacher at any time, which was absolutely unacceptable to him. Therefore, the most outstanding great divine priest of light in hundreds of years, who proudly betrayed the divine hall and single-handedly broke the confinement array set by the great divine priest of judgment, fell into the cage of life in front of Sang Sang. If the world's devout followers of Hautian Taoism knew what happened to the old man now, that he was doing chores in a shabby alley in Chang'an City, they would probably faint with grief and indignation. No matter how incredible it was, once it was done many times, people would get used to it and even start to enjoy it. It seemed that the great divine priest of light could not escape this natural cycle. The old man rolled up his cotton sleeves and stood by the stove, holding a loofah pulp in his hand and carefully washing the dishes. Because his movements were getting more and more skilled, and it seemed that he would not break the dishes today, he subconsciously became happy, and a childlike expression appeared on his face. After finishing the housework arranged by Sang Sang, the old man walked back to the front berth and put 2 square tables together to make a temporary bed. He took out a quilt from the corner behind the display shelf and laid it on the bed. He blew out the oil lamp and lay down to sleep. The starlight of the winter night shone on Lin 47th Street through the lattice on the shop door. The old man looked at the frost-like starlight on the ground, pressed the corner of the quilt tightly, and let out a comfortable sigh. He was very satisfied with his decision to leave Peach Mountain, very satisfied with his decision to come to Chang'an, very satisfied with his current life. Therefore, he forgot why he left Peach Mountain, why he came to Chang'an, and even rarely thought of the Black Shadow. Perhaps he subconsciously wanted to extend his life a little longer. To be able to find a successor was a happy thing, and to be able to find a successor like Sang Sang was an indescribable happiness. The old man believed that there had never been such a person in Hautian Taoism in the past 1,000 years, and there probably wouldn't be another one in the next 1,000 years. Sang Sang would definitely inherit his mantle and go further than him. She would eventually see the magical world that he had once glanced at with infatuation. The old man felt that he was not far from death. However, before he died, he could already see the future after death, and it was a bright and beautiful future that made him exclaim in admiration. How could he not be happy? Sang Sang, who was in the house behind the shop, was also ready to sleep. She filled a bucket of remaining hot water and began to warm her feet. She kicked the water gently with her smooth and delicate feet, like a duckling playing in the pond. A 14-year-old girl living alone took in an old man of unknown origin, and the old man had been peeping outside the old brush pen shop for many days. It didn't seem right, but Sang Sang did it. This didn't mean that Sang Sang was a kind and gullible person. She might be kind, but she had been following Ning Ke around in this world for so many years, so she knew how sinister people could be. The reason why she took in the old man was that she saw the holy light exuding from the old man's fingertips, and then she confirmed that she could help Ning Ke fight after learning the divine skill. This reason was very important. In the past 10 years, it was Ning Ke who fought and killed for her, and she could only hide under the big black umbrella, occasionally shouting. Now that she had become a big girl, she should be able to do more things, such as helping Ning Ke fight and kill when necessary. After getting along with the old man for a long time, Sang Sang even developed a sense of closeness like family, because she could feel who was really good to her. She found that the old man treated her just a little less well than Ning Quebec. I don't know what young master is doing now. It's cold in the wilderness, isn't it? Sang Sang opened her eyes and looked at the roof, her little hand on the slightly cold brick bed, imagining Ning Ke's life in the wilderness. This was the longest time she had been separated from Ning Ke, and she couldn't get used to it. Because Ning Ke was not at home, she felt that there was no need to warm the newly built brick bed in the north of the house, so she habitually began to be thrifty. These days, the amount of silver charcoal under the brick bed was pitifully small, and the surface of the brick bed was somewhat refreshing. She took out the talismans left by Ning Ke from the cabinet and carefully stuck them on the outside of her underwear. Logically speaking, except for Ning Kai, no one else could stimulate the heat in these failed fire talismans, and he obviously forgot about it. But for some reason, perhaps because she began to cultivate the divine skill, her little body gradually warmed up. The winter of the 14th year of the Tianqi era came earlier and colder than usual. Sang Sang raised her little hand to her mouth and gently breathed out 2 hot breaths. Looking at the mist in her eyelashes, she thought of something. After a moment of hesitation, she took out Ning Kai's bedding from the big cabinet, opened the door and walked into the front bed, and gently covered the old man with it. A warm bed was the most insidious enemy of getting up. So the old man woke up late the next day. Looking at the bright sky outside the shop, he was shocked to think that he had forgotten to line up to buy the hot and sour noodle slice soup. When he hurriedly got up to wash up, he saw a piece of paper pressed down by a stone on the small stool by the well. On the paper was Sang Sang's young but beautiful handwriting. I just remembered that a sister asked me to go to her house for dinner at night. She will probably be there all day. Teacher, you don't have to wait for me to eat. If you get up late and can't buy the noodle slice soup, you can go to the shop next door to eat. I told Aunt Wu. The snow on the black tiles of the South School Abbey of Haotian Taoism was quietly looking at the red palace wall not far away in the morning light. Li Qingshan, the nation master of Tang, coughed slightly and looked at the files on the table. He frowned slightly. The official of the Imperial Center Administration who came to report bowed and said seriously, Mr. 13 has left the palace and must have entered Tianqi Mountain. I don't know if he can find the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine. As for the tomes of Arcane Nation Master, if the Imperial Court does not send masters there, I'm afraid it will be difficult to get it in front of the Divine Hall. Li Qingshan shook his head and said after a moment of silence, when His Majesty sent Ning Kai to the wilderness, the Imperial Court did not know about the tomes of Arcane. Later, they decided to let him have a try. It has nothing to do with the Imperial Court or the South School or the Imperial Center Administration. This is the idea of Mr. Second of the Academy, so it is the Academy's business. You don't have to think too much. There was no need to think too much, because it was meaningless to think too much. The tomes of Arcane in the wilderness was enough to attract the attention of too many forces, especially the West Hill Divine Palace. It was obvious that they had made sufficient preparations for this. Now that the Academy has taken it over, I will no longer care about this matter. Huang Yang looked at him quietly and suddenly said, Are you going to care about that matter all the time? Li Qingshan said calmly, The Divine Priest of Light is in Chang'an. His Majesty will not allow the Divine Hall to send people here. That is my responsibility. As the nation master of Tang, I have the responsibility to protect the empire and this capital. Then he looked at Huang Yang and said seriously, You have to be careful these days. Monk Huang Yang put his palms together and said slowly, What kind of person is the Divine Priest of Light? I am just a nobody who has nothing to do with the world and hides in a shabby pagoda copying scriptures. Why would he want to come and verify his cultivation with me? After saying this, he walked to the edge of the pagoda and looked at the magnificent Chang, and under the clear winter sky. He said calmly with a smile, If he really dares to come, although I am incompetent, if he does not show his real power, there is no reason to erase me from this world quietly. At that time, the big tactical array of Chang and city can suppress him in an instant. Now, neither the West Hill Divine Palace nor the Tang Empire knew why the Divine Priest of Light came to Chang and city after escaping from the Peach Mountain. If it was because of the prophecy and the old matter more than a decade ago, it did not make sense. If he wanted to harm the Tang Empire, then Li Qingshan and Huang Yang Monk were undoubtedly the most likely targets. In this case, Huang Yang Monk's previous words had the compassion and fearlessness of feeding a tiger with his own body. Li Qingshan looked at the old monk's robe and shook his head after a moment of silence. He said, We are too passive. We must find him first. Monk Huang Yang turned around and found that there was a chessboard in front of Li Qingshan. Li Qingshan was reaching for the chess box. He was slightly surprised and said, "Are you going to make a divination again?" Li Qingshan put his right hand into the chess box and touched the slightly cold chess pieces. He nodded. Monk Huang Yang frowned and said, "Your divination ability is at the cost of your lifespan. Why do you do this?" Li Qingshan said calmly, "These days, senior brother has been looking for the divine priest of light in Chang'an City. Until today, he has still found nothing. He has taken such a big risk, so I have to do something." Master Yen Sei was the most powerful divine talisman master in the world. Even in the West Hill Divine Palace, he could be on an equal footing with the Hierarch Lord and the Great Divine Priest. Wei Guangming was the most powerful divine priest of light in hundreds of years. No one in the world knew who was more powerful. However, this kind of search and encounter was extremely disadvantageous to divine talisman masters. The crisp sound was like the spring rain coming to the world ahead of time. Dozens of chess pieces jumped and spun on the chessboard. Then, they calmed down and stopped moving. Li Qingshan had casually pulled out these chess pieces from the box, but it was very strange. There was only a single white piece, while the rest were all black. The black, matte stone chess pieces piled up silently on the left side of the chessboard, surrounding the white piece in the center. Li Qingshan looked at the chessboard in silence for a long time. Then he said, "He is still in Chang'an, not far from us." Chang'an City seemed to have been stimulated by something this winter and became as moody as summer. It had been sunny last night and this morning, but after a while, the sky was covered by gray clouds and snowflakes were falling. He Mingqi looked up at the sky and heard the footsteps in the tower behind him. He quickly took out the yellow paper umbrella from under his armpit and opened it. Looking at the nation master's cheeks, which were even more haggard than before, he could not help but feel nervous. Returning from Wanyan Tower to Nanmengui, he Mingqi went straight to the kitchen and personally watched the handyman brew the medicine. As the eldest disciple of the Tang nation master, he did not have a very good aptitude for cultivation. He knew that he could not persuade his teacher not to waste his mind and even his lifespan to perform divination, so he could only do what he could. He held the boiling medicine bowl and slowly walked into the quiet Taoist temple. Li Qingshan sat by the window and looked at the flying snow outside. He did not look back when he heard the footsteps. He waved his hand to let him put down the medicine bowl. He Mingqi did not put down the medicine bowl. Instead, he knelt beside him and raised the medicine bowl with both hands, silently and stubbornly asking his teacher to take the medicine first. Li Qingshan sighed helplessly. He took the medicine bowl and drank it slowly. Then he sighed and said, "You are so silent and stubborn. Even if you are in charge of the Imperial Center administration, you are not suitable. If I die in the future, what will you do?" Beautiful Monday morning, please vote for Jiang Ye's youngest and freshest recommendation, Dear Big Guy. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. He also has to watch you study. It's very hard. Don't be angry at him. Li Huiyuan did not understand why she suddenly mentioned this. He said confusedly, "I have a close relationship with Mingqi. Of course I won't be angry at him. But why are you so cautious about this?" Li Yu looked at the falling snow in front of the courtyard and said slowly, "A few days ago, the Academy, the Imperial Court and the Southern Gate Temple finally reached a consensus that Ning Ke would not be a visiting professor of the Southern Gate Temple, but would directly take over the position of the Nation Master. But he Mingqi is after all the Nation Master's disciple and is deeply loved by the Nation Master. It's crucial for us to get the support of the South School of Haotian Taoism. Although I haven't asked him, I believe he will support us because of my relationship with Mingqi. Li Huiyuan thought that even if he Ming-Chi could inherit the influence of the nation master Li Qin-shan in the South School of Haotian Taoism in the future, he would not be able to sit on the position of the nation master. He could not help but feel a little regretful. He touched his head and sighed, I'm afraid that Ning Ke will be a key in the future. I don't know how to make him surrender. Hearing this, Li Yu raised her thin eyebrows and scolded, I told you to be careful. But you dare to say anything. As a core disciple of the headmaster of the academy, who in the world is qualified to say that he will surrender? Li Huiyuan could not hide his arrogance and said contemptuously, even if I can't do it now, when I sit on the throne in the future, there will be countless masters in the imperial center administration and thousands of soldiers in the military. Do you think I will be afraid of him? Hearing this, Li Yu was angry and disappointed. She stared at him and said in a low voice, the academy does not interfere in the court affairs and obeys the law of the Tang Empire. That is the rule set by the headmaster of the academy. But the court is not able to make them follow this rule. If you want to sit on the throne safely, you must remember that you must maintain respect for the academy in front of others and behind the scenes. Do you hear me? Li Huiyuan was shocked by the anger in her eyes. He felt a chill in his heart and nodded subconsciously. Then, to make her happy, he held her hand and shook it gently. He said with a smile, I know, sister. No one in the world is qualified to say that he will surrender to the academy. But I believe you can make Ning Ke surrender. Hearing this, Li Yu thought of the bonfire on the journey, the story beside the bonfire, and the lad carrying 3 knives on his back. She could not help laughing at herself and said lightly, I don't have that ability. At this time, a nanny came up and said softly, the young prince is awake. Miss Sang Sang told him a couple of stories and brought him here. Li Yu glanced at her brother and said, you go back to the palace first. Father will test you again tonight. Li Huiyuan was puzzled and said, what's there to be afraid of? Father has never opposed me and my brother being close. Li Yu frowned and said helplessly, you have a bad temper. It's better to stay away from you. Sang Sang seems to be indifferent, but her heart is as clear as a mirror. You can't hide your boring thoughts from her. Li Huiyuan was so angry that he laughed and said, she is just a little handmaiden. Why should I stay away from her? Li Yu did not bother to explain anything to him. She directly picked him up from the chair and summoned the eunuchs in the palace. She told them to escort him back to the palace quickly. Looking at the yellow figure disappearing at the stone gate of the garden, she could not help but shake her head. Although her brother had made a lot of progress in the past year, he was still young after all. There were still many things he did not understand. Sang Sang was indeed a very ordinary and even lowly handmaiden. Her status was certainly far from that of a prince of the Tang Empire. However, Li Yu was very clear that this little handmaiden was the key to making Ning Ke surrender and getting close to the academy. Putting the brush on the inkstone, Li Yu looked at the small regular script she had written and turned to ask, what do you think of my calligraphy? Do you still like them? Sang Sang shook her head and said, I don't know how to judge the quality of calligraphy. As long as it is neat, I think it looks good. Li Yu did not believe her and said with a smile, your young master is one of the famous calligraphers in the world. You have followed him for so many years. How can you not know the quality of calligraphy? How can you praise him when he is grinding ink and adding incense in the middle of the night? Sang Sang opened her bright willowy eyes and said seriously, young master's calligraphy is naturally good. He doesn't need to think of words. Li Yu thought about the meaning of her words and found the pair of master and handmaiden more and more interesting. She joked and said, in your eyes, Ning Ke is the best in everything he does. I really don't know how the two of you got along with each other like this. Now that he has been away from Chang'an for some time, are you used to it? Do you miss him at night? Since returning to Chang'an from the city of Wei, Sang Sang often met with Li Yu. The Tang princess and the little handmaiden really had some affection for each other and did not care about their status when they talked. However, when she heard this, Sang Sang was probably a little embarrassed and actually threw a little tantrum. She turned around with a cold face and ignored her. Li Yu smiled. She was very clear that this kind of teasing could only be used occasionally in the conversation to shorten the psychological distance between the two. The little handmaiden seemed to be embarrassed and annoyed, but in fact, she should be happy with the hidden meaning in this kind of teasing. However, Sang Sang was still young and probably did not know what this kind of emotion was. She did not even know why she was embarrassed and annoyed. Ning Ke, who was not in Chang'an, was obviously in a state of confusion. Sang Sang stood by the courtyard and looked at the falling snow outside. Her slender figure in the background of the messy snow formed a somewhat lonely and touching picture with some kind of hope. Li Yu quietly looked at this picture and put the figure of Ning Ke's back beside the little handmaiden in her mind. She found that the picture instantly became rich and harmonious, without the slightest incongruity. She silently sighed and dispelled the trace of envy and regret in her heart. Thinking of a certain news, she softly asked, "I heard that you recently took in a lonely old man in the old brush pen shop." Sang Sang was slightly startled, turned around and nodded. Li Yu looked at her slightly dark and thin little face and felt a surge of love in her heart. She seriously reminded her, although Chang'an is peaceful and there are people watching over the shop, you should still be careful about this kind of thing. Sang Sang felt the concern and affection in her highness's words and seriously comforted her, "It's okay. He is very honest." The great divine priest of light, who had led 2 bloody cases in the world more than 10 years ago and whose hands were stained with the blood of hundreds and thousands of innocent people, could be described as honest. This was a question worth thinking about. But the old brush pen shop was indeed fine. Thanks to Ning Ke's numerous solemn requests before he left Chang'an, the Lin 47th Street now looked as lively and noisy as usual. In fact, the imperial palace's bodyguards often secretly came over to inspect, the Chang'an local government's runners patrolled more than 5 times a day, and the Fish Dragon gang never left to protect the shop from dawn to dusk. Today, apart from the imperial palace, this inconspicuous alley was probably the safest in Chang'an. What was strange was that whether it was the imperial palace bodyguards, the Chang'an local government or the Fish Dragon gang that ruled the underground world of Chang'an, they were all carrying out another order recently. They were looking for an old man. However, no one would have thought that the old man they were looking for was in the bookshop that they were guarding. In the evening, Sang Sang was worried about the old man's food and came back from the princess mansion early. She took out the key to open the shop door and walked to the patio to have a look. As expected, the old man was squatting by the stove, preparing to heat the leftovers. She could not help but frown and opened the food box that she brought back from the princess mansion. She said, "Eat this." A few days ago, she had tried to let the old man cook. But that night, she saw the blackened rice and the half-empty woodpile beside the stove. She decided not to try this again in order to save rice and dry wood. Just when the old and the young were about to eat dinner, there was a knock on the door. Sang Sang got up and was about to open the door when she suddenly thought of something. She lowered her head and continued eating. The old man understood. He brushed a grain of rice off the front of his cotton-padded jacket and got up to open the door. The door of the old brush pen shop was opened. A monk was standing at the bottom of the stairs. The monk was very young and wore a tattered frock. He had a handsome face and seemed to be above the mortal world. The monk was surprised to find that it was the old man who opened the door. He said, "I'm not looking for you." The old man was stunned. He turned around and said, "I'm looking for you." Sang Sang walked over with a bowl of rice. She looked at the young monk and frowned for a while. She remembered that she had seen this person by the meadow outside the academy when Ning Ke climbed the mountain to the 2nd floor. The monk's eyes suddenly brightened when he saw Sang Sang's little black face. He recited excitedly in a trembling voice, "Beautiful girl, the love monk Wu Dao has finally found you. These days, I have made a few new poems for you. You're the flower on the cliff, waiting for me to pluck it. You're the fish in the lake, entangled in a net made of aquatic plants. You're the biggest obstacle on the way to the other side. I'm willing to stay with you and never leave. Sang Sang listened to the words like flower and fish and glanced at the yellow croaker in the bowl. Please vote enthusiastically to encourage me, who is a little depressed and restless. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. You're tuning into the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.